Welcome to Who the Fuck Are Arctic Monkeys, the podcast where we chat to interesting people about their favourite song from the titular lads from High Green as well as much more. This week I was joined by Jack from Australian group Psychedelic Porn Crumpets. We explored how he discovered the group at an early age whilst living in England, before discussing how that childhood upbringing in the UK and then his later move to Australia have both influenced his songwriting. We chatted further on how Arctic Monkeys have continued to change as a group from album to album, and then examined this in the context of Psychedelic Porn Crumpets' own career and their evolution as a group. We talked further on subjects such as British bands breaking America, how ambitions change over time, and he reveals his story about a backstage encounter with Alex Turner during the group's Tranquility-based London shows. But before all of that, he shares his favourite track from their 6-album discography. Here's me and Jack from Psychedelic Porn Crumpets, talking all things Arctic Monkeys.
I chose Brianstorm, but there's too many to choose from, really. I think that's the first band that I'd been showed by a good friend, Sam Weston, and he lives in Dubai at the moment, but his mum lived in Sheffield for a while, and I think they were from Sheffield. They came down with this CD of like 20 songs or something. It was before Arctic Monkeys had released their first record, and I think they were handing out this like little EP. And so Amanda, Sam's mum, had gone... I must have been one of their shows, and I think when they moved down to Milton Keynes or Woburn Sands where we're from, they were playing it and they were like, oh, you got to check this band out. Man, this would have been 2002 maybe? 2003?
Yeah, way back. I remember the rumours of that, because that was the kind of MySpace days too.
Yeah, it would have been, I think it was even before that. It would have been MSN days. Like, I wasn't even, I think I was like 10, but I remember loving it. And I remember it had like Fake Tales of San Francisco on it, like what else? Bet You Look Good on the Dance Floor, and then you had Certain Romance. They had that.
Oh, brilliant song.
Yeah, and I remember the lyrics in that. I was like, wow, like really getting hooked into it at sort of a young age. And when I went to Australia, they hadn't even released their first album yet. And telling everyone, I was like, they were like, who's your favourite band? I was like, Arctic Monkeys. And they were like, what? Like, who are they? I was like, oh, like, and they're not out here yet. And I think that album, when they released that first record, sort of started getting big. But I think it was the second album for me when I, obviously having the step up in quality and sound and production and sort of songwriting as well, that Favourite Worst Nightmare record, I was like, whoa. And I think you just can't get past the first track. So Brianstorm for me is the song I chose.
I mean, I get it's straight in, you have that thunderous, it's the drumming it starts on, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're kind of straight in with that. It's an interesting one lyrically too, though, because it is this kind of character study of this shady, kind of dislikable figure.
Isn't that all Alex Turner's songs? This is like everyone's scum. I'll write about him.
I guess, yeah, definitely the first albums, and then it kind of goes a wee bit more introspective.
Yeah.
I mean, for you as a songwriter, it feels like you're kind of more the latter stuff in terms of a lot of your things tend to be from a very first-person point of view as opposed to writing about someone else. I can't think of too many of your tunes that...
No, I had like literally, as soon as I thought about doing this interview, I was like, all my lyrics are just about me. I was like, fuck, maybe I should try a page from Alex Turner's book and start writing about other people. I think it's just, you're like, maybe I'm just self-obsessed. Maybe I just want to be like, I, me, mine. That's it. Every song starts off with that. But it is great, his lyrical sort of journey where you can find a character, and even if you're just making it up, I think you've got more to work with, where I suppose from myself it's like this diary kind of insert which you get stuck on. There's so many songs you can be like, this is what I'm doing, this is how I'm feeling, blah blah blah. So it is the next step for me is moving up a person. I'm getting second person soon, Alex.
But then, I mean, how long have you been doing Porn Crumpets now? Like 8 years or something? Thereabouts?
Well, I've always been writing. I think it was the first one that sort of like, this was the first solo project. So even like songs like Surf's Up, it's probably 8 years old. And Thank God and Tomato had that for a while. Marmalade March was back in 2013 or 14. So yeah, it would be pushing that.
Wow.
And then the first album was just the collection of those sort of songs.
The thing is, though, if you've changed quite a lot as a person in the interim of those 8 years, then the songs can have taken a different subject matter anyway as a result of that.
Oh, for sure. I think, but it is nice, like, listening to... There's a funny way of looking at it, actually, because I think you've got a lot of English writing seems to be sort of about things and about sort of certain scenarios, or maybe they would like writing... Say like the Kooks, for instance, who got really big, or like Oasis, one of the biggest bands ever. A lot of their songs are sort of about someone else. Like, rather than you'd hear Australian bands and it's so introspective. So let's just take King Gizzard and Tame Impala, for instance. Like, a lot of that music is about what they've done or who they are or what they're doing. Whereas I think it's almost like a way that I suppose it's a bit more personal, but it's not saying it's in any way different or better or whatever. I think I'd love to sort of start writing about actual events and things and people, but it's a different challenge. It's a whole... Well, I think once you start writing yourself, or any artist, so you find a style, you find a way. And I think lyrics, I never actually sang in a band, so it was like guitar first, and then you're like, oh God, now I've got to write lyrics, or I've got to think about like the next stage in this. So then you go, what am I listening to? What do I like? I suppose psych-rock's just about how fucked up you get, isn't it? It's just like, and then I drank, and then I took this, and then it just carries on at like 190 BPM. But yeah, I think if you do go back to the indie days, a lot of it is about certain and other people. They have characters, and I think that's why it's so, apart from I'd say Pete Doherty, he's probably the only person that I'd say does write about himself, but even then he talks about other people. It's I don't know, I have no idea. You should do a case study on it.
Do you see that kind of push and pull between the two for you then? Because obviously coming with that English background, that, like we're saying, writing about characters, and then now that you're immersed in Australia, where like you're saying it's more introspective, do you see both sides to that in your songwriting?
I'd like to, yeah. I think definitely coming from, can I even say I'm a Kasabian fan anymore? I don't know. You're like,
I mean, I'm a Kasabian fan. I think I don't know.
Fine. Yeah, I don't know. But
Kasabian fan with a caveat.
That's it. But it's like back when they first came out with that first record, like A Polyphonic Prostitute, like all those lyrics and from that, is it self-titled record or the one with Clubfoot? Those lyrics sort of are exactly the sort of same as almost an Alex Turner world, where it's creating characters and creating things in certain environments, but using like yourself as the sort of the anchor to that world the listener's going to hear, rather than, I suppose, going back into a Kevin Parker world where it's quite personal, it's quite open, and you're sort of involved in the journey with them rather than being taken on the journey. But I've never really thought about it too much until I've literally about a couple of days ago when I started listening to Arctic Monkeys again after doing this podcast and chucked on Favourite Worst Nightmare. And there is an element of Alex in, I suppose, a lot of those lyrics, but it's kind of coming from a way that he can still remain relatively, I don't know what the word is, like he can sort of be unguided, or he can take you with it, but you're not judging him at all by who he is, because he's saying everything else about everyone else. So
I guess it's that age-old thing too, that you can tell more about the person describing the object than the description itself.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The object itself, rather.
What's that? There's a famous little saying about that, isn't there? I can't remember. Now we're going to go diving into Pluto, a dog.
It's interesting that we're kind of touching upon the first albums there, because that's what feels tied to your songwriting in terms of the setting of it. Like we're saying, a lot of it takes place late at night.
Yeah.
This kind of party setting, night out type thing. But then the third album probably feels more tied to your sound directly with those kind of psyche influences.
I reckon, yeah. Was that like Crying Lightning? Is that Humbug?
Yeah, Humbug. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that Don't Sit Down Because I Moved Your Chair?
Nah, that's fourth.
Oh, that's the fourth.
See.
That's Suck It and See, yeah.
That's a cracking song.
That is a banger of a track. It's like you could hear Alex Turner getting a Tame Impala vibe and him writing his sort of riff-based, rather than doing his sort of... Because I've always admired how Arctic Monkeys can create a riff, which is like... The hardest thing, I think if you ask any guitar player, the hardest thing in the world is to write something so simple that it's so like its own, it's so unique. Like if you were like use 4 notes and make me a White Stripes track, like what's that, Seven Nation Army, or however, it's like that you would hum and distinctly know that comes from that band. Alex Turner just pumps them out. It's like the whole of that Favourite Worst Nightmare record, and obviously the first album as well. I think that's why I got hooked in sort of the strange kind of world of riffs. Like listening to Teddy Picker, you're like, wow, that slaps. It's like, it's not heavy, but it goes harder than some Black Sabbath tracks. You're just like, what? Like it doesn't need a crash cymbal or these big drums or big thing. It's like everyone tight on a weird note that you wouldn't usually put into some progression. I don't know. I have no idea about music theory, but it sounds like what you can hear with Alex Turner is that he's taught himself guitar, but he's gone, that's strange, let's use this. And then his vocals kind of roll off the top, almost in a, like, I wouldn't say he like sings, but he kind of talks a lot, doesn't he? And nowadays he does sing, but I'm more talking about the earlier records. But
very hip hoppy.
Yeah, it is. It's got like a syncopation to it that you're driving along with the track, and I think that for me, it's like what I felt like music was. Like they just turned the page, didn't they? Wasn't that album the fastest selling debut record of all time in England?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
You're like, yeah, I've done my homework. Yeah.
It kind of reminds me a little bit, it's interesting you pick up on Teddy Pickett there. It reminds me of your stuff in that they both have a similar kind of attention-grabbing quality. Like Shagga in particular, the whole way through that record, every 5 seconds, there's kind of this other bit of ear candy. There's something going on to kind of keep you hooked into it in a similar way that they kind of achieve from the momentum of the song, if that makes sense.
Oh, for sure. And that's a huge compliment if you're comparing us to them. So I'll take it. Write that. Put that in the bio.
How do you go about constructing something in that fashion, though? Is it a case of kind of refining every moment very particularly? Like making sure that every kind of 5 seconds you have something that's going to keep people in and keep pulling them along on the journey?
I think I'm going back, like, if I'm thinking of my stuff, like, yes and no. Like, sometimes when you listen to a song, like, or when you do write a track, like say you write a track, I know a lot of people will say the best songs write themselves, and it's no word of a lie. It's like you would sit down and you know what comes next. Even before you wrote it, you're almost humming the words or whatever, or you're playing the melody, and that song might come to you in like 5 minutes. And because you haven't really overthought it, it just flows naturally the way that you've sort of subconsciously intended it to be. I think there's like definitely a case when a lot of Porn Crumpet stuff where I just go to town and overthink and come back and listen to it and then try and polish shit for a good 6 months. But you can hear, like, let's just take like Fluorescent Adolescent. Like that song is a perfect song. You can't add anything, you can't take anything away from it. I'd say another perfect song is probably Blur Song 2, where it's just like, I know they've recorded that as a joke, but that gets smashed all around the world, like on radio. It will be a track that you're like, what's a heavy song? And you think of like Killswitch Engage, or you try and put on some Korn or some Slipknot. But then Blur Song 2 is up there with like one of the heaviest tracks going. And it's just them, I don't know, it's like this progression where it's going from low to high, where you've got the riff ascending, the vocals doing something, I don't know, just screaming. It makes sense. And they said they wrote that in like 2 minutes. Same with Paranoid by Black Sabbath. So they had a bit of time left on the reel. So they were like, oh, let's just do this. It's funny that sometimes the less you kind of put into it, the more comes out of it. And I think you can hear that with Arctic Monkeys as well, how simple it sounds, but not because of the simplicity is why it works. It's because I think Alex Turner probably, apart from the recent record where you can tell they've thought about what they're doing there. That sounds amazing. Tranquility Base Hotel, like that almost goes into the next stage of their evolution, where you're like, I'm so excited for them to put out another album now, because you're like, where are they going to go? Like they've just ruled the world with pop music or rock music for so long. Throw this like spanner into the old gears through this left turn, and I think what they did was gather a lot more musical fans, if that makes sense. They weren't going for the radio crowd or the people that already liked him. They were like, well,
shouldn't have gathered some more respect from it.
For sure. I know like definitely in our band, like I think Rish, for instance, he's like one of the most hard. You can't show him anything. He hates everything. Danny doesn't like music. I don't know, but he definitely does. But they're hard to please, those kind of people. But I know when we were putting that album on, when we were touring, and they were like, what? This is Arctic Monkeys? And I think that's what they got, respect from musicians. It didn't get smashed on the radio, but you know that all the people that are listening to, I don't know, some strange bands or whatever bands they like listen to, the Arctic Monkeys, that album will probably be in their playlist rather than an AM or something. It'll probably be Tranquility Base.
Yeah, I get what we mean. Is it almost, do you feel like, as a, from an artist point of view too, that as time goes on, how do your kind of goals and what you want to achieve with it change?
World domination. No, I don't know. Well, I don't know.
I guess that's kind of what we're touching upon. That they achieved that and then kind of went past that in search of something more.
They did. And it's really nice having these conversations with yourself, because I was speaking to Tony from Middle 8. And I loved watching his videos, and he's got this one video on why didn't Arctic Monkeys break America or something. And I was like, mate, they've absolutely smashed America. Like, from my point of view, like, they're doing stadiums, but it's like, I suppose they're not at the level of like Imagine Dragons or like the rock pop world of maybe a Queens of, I don't know, where who would be a sort of similar band to The Killers, for instance, maybe that kind of stage. It was really like, I don't think there's been an English band that has really risen to the American audience, has it? Like, apart from Ed Sheeran or Adele. Like, if we're comparing Arctic Monkeys to that kind of stage, but they're so different. Like, they've got the respect from the musicians, they've got the rock capabilities of a Queens of the Stone Age. They can put out anything they want to do, but they're also one of the largest bands going. I don't know how big Muse are in like America.
Relatively big. Like, it's hard to judge, because it was a while back, wasn't it? Probably about 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
Really, that kind of first explosion of Muse.
Yeah. But
almost 20 years.
But they probably headline festivals. I know Arctic Monkeys now would probably be like a headline slot. I think that was from AM.
Yeah.
But before AM, it was like having the fastest selling like debut album of all time or something, like in England, and then releasing Favourite Worst Nightmare afterwards. It did take a while for that. Like, it literally took like 5 albums for them to get that sort of...
That first album's very British, though.
It's definitely British, but then I like the way that the British sort of take upon all cultures of music. Like, they won't be like, oh, like, it's American, so we'll support our own or whatever. It's like, you've got so many bands coming over to Europe. Like, I remember touring with Frankie and the Witchfingers, and they were backwards and forwards going to Europe. Like, there's such a beautiful crowd, or like, there's so many people that want to see such different music, whereas you come to Australia and it's so different. There is like a genre. Like, there's one radio station that sort of dictates what gets played, what festivals get put on, and it's difficult for bands to come here because of that. And so, let's say the Mars Volta, for instance, they'd probably be doing like, I don't know what they're doing, like 10,000, 20,000 cap rooms in America and doing big festival shows. But here, it's like, they'd probably be doing like 2,000 cap, which is weird because they're not on the radio. They're a hard band to sort of get into, a bit of a niche project. But because the demographic or the population is so condensed in Europe and in America, you get that like listener. It's just the cities are bigger, I suppose.
Your manager Murray, he worked in some campaigns for the Arctic Monkeys, right?
He did. I should have got him on this with you. Yeah, I call him. It's saved as Murray Monkeys in my phone. He was. I think they started working with them from Humbug. Was that the third album? Third album's Humbug.
Yeah.
So they signed to Wildlife, and so when we were with Wildlife and at the same time as them, and we literally got off the plane. There's a good story actually, where the first time we ever went to tour UK, we like landed in London, and my brother came down and met us at this Mile End Beds, or it's like this really bad backpackers, and we had 1,000 records delivered to the hostel, where we had to put them all into whatever, like package them up and ship them off. And English post is not like, it's so different. Like, if you don't, the stamps go out by like a day, so you have to do 1,000 records in a day. And we were just like, what the fuck, we didn't even know. And Richard paid like $8,000 and they all went expired. And so Murray was like, I've got tickets, and I think Arctic Monkeys were playing at the O2, so they just released, this would have been 2019 when they just released Tranquility Base.
Yeah, and they did a few shows at the O2, didn't they?
Yeah, and so Murray managed to be like, he's like, I got tickets, so we were like, oh, sweet. And we obviously just got off the plane, had to ship all these records, realised they're expired, so we're fucked. We were just like jet lagged, but we're like, we're going to this gig, like, it's going to be sick. Started drinking. Anyway, like, after the show, we're all buzzed, because, I don't know, our blood was probably thin from being 50,000 feet in the air for 24 hours. And then Anyway, there's Alex Turner and there's the Arctic Monkeys. Like, we managed to go backstage with them, and we were just like, this is sick. This is so sick. So I remember going up to him, and as we walked over, Rish has tripped up, spilt his pint, and it smashed all over his shoes.
Oh.
And I was like, no! That was like the only time we ever would be cool. We could just be like, hey man, all I wanted to say was, hey man, sick gig, the classic. But like, yeah, I couldn't even get that in. It just turned into a, hey man, really sorry. Do you want some paper towel? Which is,
oh man.
Yeah, but hopefully he remembers us.
It's funny you say Murray, started working with them on Humbug. Because if we compare Humbug to the debut record, almost unrecognizable. And if we compare Humbug to, AM or Tranquility Base, again, the same.
Yeah.
They go through these phases where every record does have its own distinct sound. It feels like its own unique thing. For you as a creator, what do you feel has been the biggest jump in a Porn Crumpets record? I
think it's like you're in the eye of the storm, that it's really hard to distinguish. Like, I do try and think about it, and I think listening back, like, you can definitely hear it. I think from myself, I have no idea, but I'm sure other people will be able to gather it. But I think it's like you get more mature and you sort of want to write cleanly, if that makes sense. Like, you try and, like, I would say Shiger is our messiest album. It's weird. It's like, I think the ideas are there, but the production on it and everything, after listening back, you're like, oh, I should have done this or should have done that. And I think trying to write an album about alcohol and you smash it the whole time and recording it's probably not a good idea. But so now it's like, all right, get the buzz, find what you're going for, record it, maybe when you're clean or maybe when you're just not drunk. So and you can and listen back and hear it. And I think there's so many ways that maybe that's what you can hear in the Arctic Monkeys as well. It's like people are always trying to refine what an instrument sounds like. So even if you talk to any guitarist, I suppose, or like piano player or drummer, it's like they'll never be happy with the tone they've got. They might be, but then 2 years later they'll be like, oh, what was I doing? And sound and tone and music and recording is constantly changing. It's like, it's not. It's like this fashionable sound. It's like what was kind of cool in the 90s probably sounds disgusting now. And the 80s is a bit weird, but then the 70s vibe came back, and now the 80s vibe's coming back. And you've got like a lot of girl bands all coming up here, like, and boy bands now in Australia who are getting that Spice Girls level back. And you're just like, what? Is that cool again? But it's getting smashed on the radio. It's like super groups.
Confidence Man have kind of got a bit of that though, like doing it slightly ironically.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way you do it. Like, I know Pond did it with their 80s thing, and it's like the irony of it, but they're doing, it's almost a parody, isn't it? But then taking it seriously, but the sound is a parody. And then you're like, do we get the joke? Are we the joke? Like, and then you're like, is there a joke, or am I not getting it? And then you sort of like, but it's like the more you try and hold on to something, time will forget you pretty quickly. So going from Arctic Monkeys, like, they're never going to release like a garage rock album again. Like, oh, they might do. It would be amazing. But if you've got like take Tranquility Base, how clean everything sounds. Like, it's so like precise. Like, you have this Rhodes piano just sort of sitting nicely on a drum kit, and that drum kit is literally just a kick and a snare in most of that track. Like, there's no big cymbals, there's nothing to sort of take away from the vocals, and it sounds like it's got this flavor of a Kubrick movie. Like the way they all did the videos for it as well, which is insane.
Such an elegance to it.
There is, and I think that's that getting more mature as an artist. Like, man, it's funny if you can. I feel like I know what I need to do. Putting it into like perspective and actually doing it is so much harder. And looking at Arctic Monkeys and the way they have done it is probably the reason they are one of the, if not, they will be in. I mean, they're definitely, if the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is a thing, I don't even pay attention to it, but they'll be in there. They're the type of band that will get to that state where they are household names now. It's like everybody knows that band. If you were when you start off in music, that's sort of like your goal, isn't it? Or like your dream. It's like, at least have enough people to listen to you to be like, whether they like it or not is up to them. But if they've just listened to you, that's pretty cool.